Hello and welcome back to the next session of our Learning Exchange. I'm Andrew Hill, Senior Business Writer at the Financial Times, and I'm joined in the studio by André Lacroix, CEO of Intertek Group and author of Leadership with Soul, new book out now. Also on screen, Kelly Beaver, CEO UK and Ireland for Ipsos, the polling company and research company. Emad Al-Ablani, General Manager and Head Group Human Resources at NBK, National Bank of Kuwait, and Nancy Bornemann, HR Director and Global Learning and Development Head at Endress+Hauser, the manufacturing company. Welcome to all of you. We're going to talk about next generation leadership, as Gustav explained. And we're also going to, I hope, make this a very interactive session. If you have questions, thoughts, ideas that you want to feed into the discussion, please use the Slido app to submit them. I'll be keeping an eye on that on my iPad here and trying to weave these questions into our discussion over the next 45 minutes. I'd urge you not to wait until the last minute to submit the questions, and that way we can find time to address them, I hope, during our session. So next generation leadership, clearly, as Martin Wolf has laid out, there are a number of challenges, technical, economic, demographic, political, that businesses face. And it will fall, by definition, to the next generation, in lots of cases, to deal with those. And the current generation of leadership clearly bears some, at least general responsibility as a generation for having got us into the place we're in now, which itself throws up various tensions. But I want to ask each of our panelists, as an opening question really, what they believe are the ways in which they can prepare today's workforce for the future challenges that Martin has laid out. And I'll start with you, André, in the studio, and then work my way around our panelists. How do we prepare today's workforce for the future?
We at Intertek, we are really fortunate because we are a really growth-oriented company, and what we do in society is really essential for the world to operate safely. So, we are really mission critical. So we are really focused on growth, no question about it. There is nothing that we touch in our lives every single day that has not been tested or inspected by Intertek, and quality assurance is essential. If I were to tell you, for instance, that we test the fuel safety and quality of Air Force One, and President Trump and President Biden couldn't fly without us. Essentially, we've got very intrinsic defensive characteristic. Having said all of that, we are a global business and we face challenges. And how we prepare our teams is very simple. First of all, we make sure we are focused on what we call leading and lagging indicators. In any business, you've got to be paranoid about the next trend. You've got to be paranoid about what's happening in the marketplace. And you've got to know your business goals so you're ready to take action. So that's starting with the facts. The other thing we do is we over-communicate. It's really important in good and bad times for everyone to understand where you stand, because we are one team. We're all on the same page. And if you need to take corrective actions, we need to hear the good and bad news real time. And then, finally, it's all about how you measure your performance. And you got to benchmark yourself against your competitors. At the end of the day, it's never a straight line. There is always ups and downs in businesses. And the only thing that matters is being better than your competitor. And that's how you create a sense of pride in delivering performance in challenging and also challenging times. So that's how we prepare our teams. And in my view, these are essential, focus areas for us to handle the complexity ahead.
Right. Let me just ask one follow-up before I go on to ask Kelly the same question. What's the sort of, in terms of developing the next generation within the company? Clearly, like all companies, it's a mixture of training the people you have and recruiting good people from outside. Yep. How is that adapted to what's needed for the future? We'll come back to talk about all the skills that are needed, but I'm just wondering what you're doing differently in terms of programs to keep up with competition.
We have stepped up the way we look at data. data science is really important. There is so much data to look at and people can get confused. So being really assertive, this is really, really important. The other thing is being able to plan ahead, and scenario planning is part of the skills that you need, because you cannot plan for just one scenario. You got to have multiple scenarios. And one of the skills that obviously we are focusing on is asking our leaders and young leaders to think of both offense and defense. When there is a challenging situations, the first reaction is, let's play safe, let's protect cash. Important, but you got to innovate, you got to invest, because when there is a downturn, the first company to perform better will overperform over time, because they will get a momentum advantage. So that's what we try to do in terms of helping our leaders think through this complexity attached to crisis management.
Right. Well, we'll come back to how leaders act in times of crisis, perhaps with a bit of reference to recent crises in a second. But let me turn now to you, Kelly. Talking of data, obviously Ipsos has a lot of data about what generations are thinking about the future challenges and so on. But how would you answer this question about planning and preparing today's workforce for future challenges?
So I think it's first worth reflecting on what the workforce have been through in the past and the extent to which they've seen this level of uncertainty before. And 3 in 10 of the workforce today have not been through an economic recession of scale before. So look across your workforce, and on average, 3 in 10 of them haven't seen something like what we're about to head into in the coming months and years. And so part of our role as leaders in a business is to help them navigate, but also to teach them a little bit about what you do when an economic downturn hits, what kind of things are important. And actually, your previous speaker spoke really eloquently about leading indicators and knowing what's coming, not just looking in the rearview mirror, being tighter on things like invoicing and cash control, getting a good visibility of your carryover in your pipeline. The finances become very, very important. But also, ultimately running a business is about 2 things. It's about your people and it's about your clients. The understanding of your clients' problems and the understanding of how your people are facing into these financial uncertain times themselves are absolutely critical, and helping to then communicate to them how you can add extra value to them, to their lives, etc., becomes fundamental, because those who add the most value will thrive in a time of economic uncertainty, both with their ability to attract talent, retain talent, and lead through it, and also to do the same, attract and retain clients. So I would say people, clients, absolutely pivotal. But don't forget, many have never experienced this before. And so you do need to teach some of the fundamentals that those of us who have been through times of great uncertainty, not pandemic, where ultimately there was a huge amount of pastoral care provided to employees during that time. Collaboration was critical, government stepped in, etc. Economic recession is a different type of challenge.
Right. Before I turn to Emad, Kelly, what's the research showing us about how the next generation or younger generations of the workforce are thinking about coming challenges? Anything that you can pick out from surveys you've done?
Yes, indeed. So some of the core things that are impacting on that younger generation at the minute is things like their own level of income. And I think they're very focused on their own level of income, more so than those of longer tenure in the workforce. Gen Z, which is the group that have come into the workforce most recently, and all of those younger millennials as well, are the ones who haven't experienced this sort of economic recession before, but they're also the ones that are most concerned about the personal impacts and less aware, perhaps, of some of the wider organisational impacts and how they can be equipped to help companies work through this time. And that's what I meant about giving them really basic things that they can focus on, actions that they can take in a time of crisis to have a positive impact. Because ultimately, as leaders as well for that group, we are the bringers of hope, the messaging of hope. And for that generation, there's huge opportunities to innovate, to learn. In times of crisis, that's when you learn the most. And so there's a huge opportunity for that workforce. And I don't think they are fully abreast of the upside also for their own personal development from an economic challenge point.
Right, always hard to see the upside when you're in the middle of the crisis, of course. Emad, let me talk to you for a second about this. How is the bank preparing the workforce, particularly the next generation of the workforce, to meet the challenges that Martin Wolf and André and Kelly have all referred to?
Actually, you should first start to understand the current workforce that you have. And then definitely with that type of uncertainty, with the, let's say, motives that would come behind the new generation, you need to really improvise and come up with the right solution from their minds. Meaning that you put those people in the middle or in the center of your solution and come up with solutions that really keep them stick with the organization. By saying that, definitely, we saw that the current generation actually would like to see a development opportunity, more upskilling their skills. So we invest heavily in training and development intervention for those people. Yet we need to communicate their career path clearly, actually. So the current generation, if they don't see their path as let's say, from clarity point of view, as well as a commitment, if you do that, you will receive this. Definitely you will face challenges in retaining them. So by doing that, actually, you need to do it in a more accessible way, because at the end, you cannot control the attrition rate. No matter what you have do or you did for those generation, there will be an attrition. But you need to clarify them. If they decided to leave you, what they are going to leave behind. And this is the employee value proposition that we would like spread and clarify it to the new generation.
Right. I mean, just to come back to you on that, Emad, is there a sense that you have that with the generation that's coming into the bank now, that you're looking at shorter tenure, shorter stints at the bank, and they're coming in with the idea that this is a 3 or 4 year part of a much longer and more varied career with more employers than their predecessors?
Absolutely. Actually, first of all, we need to accept that their tenure in the organization would be shorter than before. And as much as you keep them engaged and feeling the purpose of their, let's say, exist within this organization, then definitely you will manage to extend that period as much as you could. And with accelerated, let's say, career path, definitely, I think that generation will be stick to the organization.
Right. Nancy, just tell us whether some of these responses resonate with you, with a different business in a different part of the world. I think you have 16,000 employees. Yeah. Do these sound like the same actions that you're taking to meet their challenges and to keep the younger generation workforce happy and motivated?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. From a leadership perspective, we do talk about having the capability to continue to do sense making, and sense making not from the perspective of tunnel vision, where you're very focused, bringing in your intellectual intelligence and looking at the business, but actually opening up and really sensing what's happening out there from the outside in, and the impact that brings within your organization. So I think that's one thing that's really important, particularly when we look at the world and how complex the world is. So this perspective of complex systems and also business ecosystems, it's really, really important to make sure that you're looking broad and sensing what's going to be coming in the future. So it's kind of like this perspective of being future ready and what are the things that you need to do there. And what comes out of that is definitely two things. One thing from a leadership capability perspective is this idea of relating, right? So connecting with your people and connecting with the younger generation, of course, and being able to have empathy, being able to sort of, bring people together to collaborate. These types of perspectives are really, really important. I think also, in that relation space, it's so important as a leader to be self-aware and connecting with yourself. What's your purpose? What are your values? What are your key principles? And that really needs to be tight and key with the business and with the people. And then the last part that I wanted to really iterate based on all those perspectives. You're dealing with people, you're working with teams, and the perspective of diverse teams is really important as we move forward to be future ready, because the world is changing. The world is so dynamic. So how can we look at teams and make sure that we have this agile and adaptive view and way of working? So this is that addition of new ways of working and looking at teams, and the fact that teams should be smaller. I mean, you know, there's a quote from Jakob Morgan who says, "Hey, listen, if you cannot feed a team with 2 large pizzas, then your team is way big. It's just too big." So you want to have smaller teams so that they're more nimble, so that they can move faster and move quickly as the environment changes. And that's real tough for leaders, because it means that leaders need to empower. They need to let go. They need to enable the younger generation or these diverse teams to make their own decisions, to have iterative processes, to experiment, and to try things and then keep going. So I think those are the aspects that we're looking at in a production, a manufacturing organization. That's really important for us to be able to be ambidextrous, to innovate and be fast at innovation, close to the customer, so that those customer journeys, but then also to be efficient, leveraging, someone mentioned data, for example, data and automation and these types of things. So.
Right. Yes, that's. I mean, the two pizza rule, I think, is one that Jeff Bezos has also put in place at Amazon,
Yes.
isn't it?
That's right.
We've obviously come through, or are coming through, a particular crisis, the pandemic, and there is this sense of sort of perma-crisis, perpetual crisis, that just as you think you've got one behind you, another one comes along. So I'd just like to touch in with each of you a little bit on how you have led through the recent crisis, or the recent crises. I spoke at the beginning of the pandemic on a similar panel about the difference between the sort of acute phase of the pandemic, where we were all scrambling to react and get into lockdown with the correct equipment and the right mindset, and re-establishing processes in a very odd and unprecedented situation, and the sort of chronic phase, which arguably we're still in, where we're coping with, you know, the challenges of hybrid work, the other crises that are coming along, both the long-term ones and the shorter term, from climate crisis to war in Europe. I mean, these all require different types of leadership, André, but just wondering if you can pick out a few practical examples of the way in which you perhaps reassured. Nancy talked about sense making. Yeah. How did you deal with your team members, particularly the ones, as Kelly mentioned, who haven't been through anything? Well, none of us have been through anything like this before, but those who were experiencing these types of crises for the very first time.
Absolutely. We do run a leadership course at Intertek, which I basically run with my colleagues, and I spent quite a bit of time on crisis management, what I call turnaround management. And the simple principle is that in any situation, the operating capability of the business needs to be in line with the business complexity. And when you have a crisis, typically it's because, as Martin was talking, there is a shock, or sometimes multiple shock, impacting your company and increasing the complexity immediately. And what I advise our team to do is first peel the onion, really understand the situation. Not every crisis is going to be wasted. There will be opportunities, and try to come up with short-term goals that will create a sense of hope, so that people can see in your team the light at the end of the tunnel, and you can measure immediate success. The other thing that I try to help my colleagues, think about is, the importance of rescoping, reframing, prioritizations. Complexity means you could be overwhelmed. So focus on fewer, actions that are going to have a big impact, that you can really make a difference with your business very quickly. What I call that is fewer, bigger, faster. And the final advice I give to my teams, based on my experience, and trust me, I've done a few crises, the mad cow disease at Burger King, or 9/11 at Euro Disney, right, or the automotive industry with Inchcape in 2009. We had a big, reduction of demand, and recently COVID. You've got to be the chief energy officer. You've got to be present. You've got to be close to your team. You've got to increase your frequency of communications. During the first 6 months of COVID-19, I would do a weekly podcast to the entire organization to let them know what was happening that week and what we're going to do next week, because the short-term, focus is really, really important. And then share successes, recognize, celebrate quick wins. The more you can basically market your quick win internally, the higher the energy is going to be, and that's going to help you deal with the unexpected. So these are the few advice I give to our team. Then suddenly this is what I've been practicing for many, many decades.
Right. Just a question. I mean, I was at a conference last week on management where one of the CEOs on a panel there said, you need to be absorbing the anxiety of your team and emitting energy. That's a chief energy officer. I thought, well, that's so exhausting. I mean, how personally do you cope with that? If you're absorbing a lot of anxiety and you can't ignore it, how do you get over that personally? What was your sort of technique? What is your technique?
Well, my experience is, as a leader, you give and you get energy. Of course, you have to give energy to your team. You are the chief energy officer. But if you're authentic, if you're genuine, if you care for your people, which is obviously the subject of the book you were referring before, you get a lot of energy.
Right.
And the biggest source of energy for me is when I see my teams grow. I see people rising to the challenge and doing the things they would not even think of doing a minute ago. And that's, how you get your energy is by, sharing successes and achievement through your teams.
Right. Kelly, as the other CEO on the panel, I mean, the point that Nancy mentioned was about making sense of the crisis. What I'm wondering is, at what point, perhaps in any of the last 2 or 3 years when we've been heading into this sort of series of crises, how easy is it for a CEO to say, I just don't know, in answer to the question of what happens next? I mean, André talked about scenario planning. That's a way of obviously testing various approaches. And as I understand it, during the crisis, CEOs spend a lot of time obviously running new scenarios. You'd have, best outcome, medium outcome, worst outcome, and then perhaps everything got worse and the best outcome was then your medium outcome and so on. I'm just wondering about the power of saying, I don't know, and how sparingly or often that should be admitted by a CEO during a crisis.
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I'll tell you a story. At the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first things I did was bring my senior management team. First of all, I was telling them to go home from early February because we're a global business and obviously we saw what was happening in China. And most of them were telling me I was mental and this wasn't going to happen. And I was really worried at that point in time. And when ultimately we locked our teams down, which was a week ahead of when government in the UK moved to do it, I did a briefing call with all of my senior leaders. And my daughter interrupted the call. She came running in behind me. And the fact, I got so many messages after that about the humanity and the authenticity of the messages that I was communicating, which were, this is what we do know, and this is what we can do as a senior leadership team. I need you speaking to your clients. I need you speaking to your team. I know you can't see them visibly, but I need you to have small group conversations online and one-to-ones ASAP with as many people as you possibly can. These are things that are in your gift. We don't know what will come next, but if we work together as a team, we will be able to have the best outcome for us individually and for our business. And the fact that I couldn't say what was coming next, but I could give them purposeful hope and actions to take. People want to help. In a crisis, your workforce is bought into your organization. They want to help see it through with you, but you need to give them an idea of what is feasible and how to do it. And the other thing we know from our research is mass communications are often what leaders revert to. Big webinar broadcasts, they have the least impact in terms of the trust that people feel in you and they feel in the organization. And during the pandemic, many CEOs reverted immediately to large-scale webinars because that was the easiest way to speak to the masses. But keeping going with small group conversations, one-to-ones, any new joiner, do a one-to-one for 10 minutes. It's 10 minutes out of your day. It makes a massive impact to how they feel, trust and authenticity in you as a leader and in the future of the business. So there's the other last thing probably is just about, I think this reflects on the last speaker's point actually, senior management only have capacity for a certain number of priorities. And you need to recognize that and make sure that you're clear with them on what those priorities are. One of the things that happened, I saw in other organizations, was they overextended by firefighting on so many fronts that their senior management had too many priorities and therefore no priorities. And so being clear with people on what we're focused on and really easy, tangible actions.
Yes, that goes well to André's point about complexity and trying to keep to the simple and the sort of visible progress. I'm going to come to you, Emad, in a moment with the similar, asking you for some tips there on sort of leaders in crisis. But just to remind people, we're about at the halfway stage. I'd love to hear your questions for any of the panel or all the panel. Do use the Slido app to submit them, and I will weave those in. Emad, we've just published a podcast about what the future holds for HR, and in which I and my colleague Isabel Berwick, the host of the Working It FT podcast, talk about the challenges for human resources departments. Obviously, in the first phase of the pandemic, you and your peers were very much the people who were providing the sort of reassurance, the comfort, often the practical, how do we get laptops out to thousands of people working from home unexpectedly and so on, those sorts of issues. I just wonder whether now there's a moment where, as people, leaders, you're having to think about some of these tough decisions that will be passed down in a more recessionary environment. But tell me a little bit how you handled leadership in the crisis and crises that we've been going through.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we were a bit fortunate that we, prior to the pandemic, because of the, let's say, the geographical footprint that we operate in, which is sometimes there is a tension, a political tension very nearby. We used to run scenarios for business continuity and so on. But let me tell you the truth, when pandemic hits us and hit the world everywhere, I think the CEOs or the senior management in MBK was brave enough to say that, Emad, we are going to run the business from, let's say, financial perspective, but now you are the CEO of human resources. So you tell us what should we do, how to deal, how to react, how to really provide you with the support in order to reassure, let's say, the employees, while there is a huge ambiguity about how to deal with the situation. So I cannot tell you how hot the seat that I used to sit in, because I felt with high responsibility in order to provide them with a solution, how to, let's say, mitigate the risk, how to shrink the teams in order to run the bank. At the end, our country requires to import medication, food, you name it. So we kept some of the business line operated with the minimal, let's say, workforce, and as well as from home. So you can imagine to provide, let's say, or prepare the needed laptops, the needed VPN accesses for those people. You know that the financial sector is very sensitive when it comes for financial transaction. You need to be risk averse and be sure that when you do any type of transaction that you avoid any, let's say, fraud or fraudulent attacks and so on. So I think my capacity as a leader at that time, it started to be built from the way on how to spread the responsibility. Actually, creating small teams will provide you with a quick response, quick feedback, actually, and take the right decision at the right moment and achieve the expected, let's say, best result within the available resources that you have. So I think it was small groups of teams. We created the right, let's say, communication channels. Even let's say the workforce, we kept them engaged with our senior manager through different, let's say, communication channels like Instagram, videos, WhatsApp, and you name it. So we kept our employees very close to each other. We dealt with the circumstances as we, let's say, managed to do so.
Right. Nancy, turn to you. I mean, this question of getting feedback, obviously, when we were all remote, it was harder to do. In some respects, as Kelly mentioned, people defaulted to mass communications. To Emad's point, how did you find ways to know what was going on, essentially? I mean, the keeping that communication open that might have been done in a sort of intuitive, automatic way if you have people sitting around you.
So the nature of our company, as I mentioned before, we're a manufacturing business. So number one, we have, let's say, knowledge workers, but we also have people in production.
People who needed to go in, yeah.
Exactly. You had to go in. So one of the things about, we're a German-based company, German-Swiss. So you've got this mentality of, structure and hierarchy, and vulnerability is like, whoa, no, what is this? So that was difficult for some of our leaders. But we went back to our principles. Who are we? We are a family-based company. We're family-owned. We still are today, even though we're 6,000 plus employees, 16,000 plus employees. So family. It was very important, that perspective. So for us, it was, we were not going to do any layoffs. We were going to do everything possible to make sure that employees felt that they are valued members of the company. And we also look at our communities, because we invest in our communities as well. So that was really important for our CEO to say, you know what, I need to communicate to employees, but also to the community as well. So Emad mentioned, using social media, and our CEO actually, from a personal perspective, he writes messages out to the public, to the community, as well as to employees, and it's not filtered. So it's
right.
His own messages in terms of how he feels and how he believes. That's one thing. The other thing that came into play was culture. Culture was huge, because you couldn't have one massive approach and spread it out into all of the different countries that we operated in. So we needed to have small local teams, management teams, who would decide what needed to be done within that country. And again, as I mentioned, we're a German-Swiss company. A lot of decisions are made there, but all of a sudden the leaders needed to start to talk to each other in the different entities and understand what's happening in the different countries, in the different markets, and what that meant to our people, to our communities, and to the market overall. And then we would respond accordingly. So that was also, something new from the perspective that usually we look at that from a pure business perspective. Now we really had to look at it from a people perspective, and not just HR, right? So it just went across all functions, all dynamics of the company. So that was, I think, really, really big. So this cultural intelligence, coupled with emotional intelligence, was really something that we had to bring in and start to balance and share our vulnerabilities out into the world. And lastly,
right.
in the emotional intelligence area, it was about allowing not only the leaders top down to talk about what was going on and how they felt, but to also hear from others within, at all different levels of the organization, in terms of what they were experiencing, what they were going through. I mean, some people were going through losses, personal losses in this crisis. So it was having avenues where people can talk with each other, that people can share how they were doing, and enabling time and space for those kind of emotions to come through.
Right, thank you. Yes, I wanted to spend a bit of time before we wind up in 10 or 15 minutes talking about the competencies and skills that are needed for next generation leaders in the face of everything we've already discussed. But just a couple of questions that have come in. André, let me ask you, in fact, building a bit on what Nancy was just saying, clearly as we emerge from this, you hope that some of the culture has been reinforced by the experience that people have gone through. But we have obviously seen in the data the so-called great resignation, the big quit, the attrition of people who decided for whatever reason, as they emerged from pandemic, that they didn't want to be there any longer. The question is, what does a company have to provide or to do to avoid an even greater resignation? Have you found you've had specific things that you've had to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, we look at retention with our customers, employees, attrition very, very carefully. And we spend a lot of time discussing with our teams. And the simple answer for us is growth. We believe that if you focus on growth, if you outperform your competitors with the most exciting growth in your industry, you are more likely to attract, retain, and develop the best talents. Our view is that the best talents want to work for the best companies. So the really important point here is don't lose sight of the offensive side of the games, right? There are always opportunities. You got to invest, and playing offense and defense at the same time in this crisis will take you very, very far, because your employees will say, you know what, this is a company that is investing in the future. Don't lose sight of the investment for growth. Growth is exhilarating. Growth is thrilling, is fun, and everybody wants to be part of a big growth story. That's, for me, the silver lining here. I understand risk management, I understand scenario planning, I understand cash management, but you got to focus on growth.
Right. There's another question here, but I'm not going to ask you to answer it straight away, but I will say what it is. It's the classic one about now the pandemic seems to be a bit more under control. Companies have fallen back to wanting their people in the office. So I'm going to ask each of you right at the end what your view is on that, so as not to have too much of a long discussion about hybrid working, but we'll come back to that for each of you at the end. Let me continue, André, with you for a second about this idea of what sort of competencies, what skills, what traits do these next generation leaders need? Is that the same as it ever was, or do you feel that has changed? And if so, how, as a result of what we're now going through?
Look, my view is that leadership needs to evolve and change like society. And for young leaders, future leaders, the opportunities are immense. Gallup, the authority in engagement tracking around the world, is just telling us 80% of the global workforce is disengaged. My conclusion is that corporations today are better run than 20, 30, 50 years ago, but are still overmanaged and underled. 2.8 billion employees go to the workplace every day, not feeling passionate and excited about the day ahead. This is a huge opportunity ahead of everybody in the corporate world. And what the world needs is what I call good leadership. And what is good leadership? It's of course, the topic of Leadership with Soul, the book you mentioned earlier today. It starts, with having strong values. As a leader, you need to operate with strong values. It's got to start with respect. Courage. You've got to be courageous. You got to be risk, taking in your mindset. You've got to be, of course, focusing on integrity. You got to be passionate, being responsible, leading with a purpose that is meaningful and inspirational. What is the grand meaning of what we're trying to do here is really important. Even more so because life is too short. You want to have an impact. You want to be a force for good. Of course, you got to be visionary entrepreneurs. Leading with both EQ and IQ is essential. I mean, we talked quite a bit about EQ in the panel today. We need more EQ in a workplace. Putting people at the heart of your growth strategy is what it's all about. You want to speak, act, and think from your heart.
Right.
And today it's missing. And people know that if you don't genuinely care for them, they're not going to follow you. And other important point is sustainability. As a leader, you've got to focus on sustainability. This is the movement of our time, and you've got to put that on the agenda. Finally, as a future leader, recognize you've got many stakeholders. The leaders who only focus on short-term results for the next quarter earnings release are not going to be delivering sustainable performance. You need to deliver for all stakeholders, your customers, your clients, your employees, of course, the regulator, the community, your suppliers, and your shareholders. So that's, in my view, what good leadership is all about. But the opportunity is significant. 2.8 billion employees go to work every day feeling disengaged. Isn't it the opportunity ahead of us?
Right. Nancy, I'm going to come back to you because you mentioned culture when you in your last answer, and when we were preparing for this panel, you also talked about IQ and EQ and CQ, culture quotient.
Yes.
Anything else you'd like to add on that?
On top of culture or another? Another
well,
one.
either explaining a little bit more about the cultural quotient, the CQ part of this, or alternatively adding to any of the traits that André's mentioned.
Yeah, hey, culture is such a big part of what's happening in our as we move forward with our world today, and the different markets that we have, and the fact that the way you operate in one market from a cultural perspective is very different from another, and you need to make tweaks and perspectives from that perspective, from that viewpoint. So when you operate at a global level, you also need to be aware of local needs and local requirements, whether it's products, whether it's ways of operating, and so on with people. But I think another one that is really important is what we call spiritual intelligence. And I'm not just talking about, Om and, going into a state of, not that. I'm actually talking about exactly what we were mentioning before, purpose, right? Values, principles, because when you know that and you know what you stand for as a leader, this is how you can build credibility. This is how you can lead with integrity. This is how you can do what you commit to as a leader. And then also be vulnerable and start to kind of let others, empower others to make decisions, to experiment, to make mistakes and learn and grow as an organization into the future. I think that strong sense of purpose is so incredible, and that's what I mean when I talk about this spiritual intelligence. And then with that is this agile mindset, and what I mean by that is, as a leader, being able to accept differences, being able to leverage different ideas, we talk about diversity and inclusion. This is so important. This is in this critical space. So from a leadership development perspective, an example is you take your leaders and your leaders in Germany, for example, and you send them to China in the production environment there, and you have them see what the differences are in terms of that production environment to build that agile mindset, right? You take leaders and you say, listen, for 1 year, you need to volunteer for an NGO. Why? Because all of a sudden they have to lead without authority. It's no longer this top-down, I tell you what to do, because now you're dealing with people who have different views, different perspectives, and they don't report to you. So then all of a sudden you learn how to be more agile in your mindset when working with others. And so I think these types of things are really important for leaders and developing leaders.
Right. Emad, do you want to add any traits that you haven't already heard mentioned, or maybe emphasize any of the ones that have been mentioned?
Yeah, actually, I think the secret would be with the adaptation. Adaptation should be really one of the competencies, or the ability to adapt new, let's say, challenges and understand the future before it comes, and prepare yourself. Because let's imagine that the new generation become the leaders. I think it is burden on them actually to understand and to be ready to adapt the generation after them. So I think that skills should be one of the things that they have to.
Right. Kelly, another trait, and then we're almost out of time.
I think you've covered a lot. If I was saying anything different, it would just be, if you'd have asked me what the core leadership attribute was 40 years ago, I would have said fabulous problem-solving skills. If you ask me what it is today, I would say fabulous problem-solving skills, because leaders consistently, it's their job to navigate the stakeholders, see the future before everybody else, and ultimately be chief problem solver as well as chief energy officer.
Right. That's nice. One last round. There's one sentence from each of you. One on the answer to the question, what's your view on wanting people back in the office? Just a sentence, if you've mandated, or André, start with you.
We've learned to operate differently with technology. I think this is something we need to keep. but there is nothing better than being face-to-face, resolving problems together, and being creative. So we've got to be back in the office and realizing that certain things can be done working from home.
Okay, Kelly?
We study society and we advise our clients on who everybody is, from a consumer, from a citizen, from what they watch on the television to how they are as an employee and a stakeholder. You cannot do that completely remotely, and you cannot do that to the best of your ability completely remotely. We are a hybrid organisation by choice. We're not remote first, we're not office first, we're hybrid by choice. We've got the tech capability to enable us to do that well, but I believe it's very important. Face-to-face contact with clients and with each other is incredibly important.
Okay, Emad, everybody back in the office there?
Yes, it is actually a mandatory, but yet based on the, it's an available, let's say, option. And I think we need to hit the balance from a well-being perspective. So whenever it requires in a certain, let's say, geographical location that related to MBK, then I think the option is there.
Okay, and Nancy, you've already mentioned obviously that you had manufacturing personnel going in.
Hey, we're in office first.
Right.
So office first, because we believe that collaboration is important. Face-to-face collaboration is so important for innovation, and we experienced less innovation when we were working from home, and then it started to come back again as soon as people were in the office. So we actually have, like intellectual property and patents. We can actually prove that it really increased when people got back in the office and started collaborating again face to face. However, having a flexible approach is also important for us. To enable people with different needs to be able to have a little bit of a balance and be able to work from home when needed.
Great. Well, we've been hybrid here. We've been flexible. We've over-communicated. We've been empathetic. We've peeled the onion. And we hope have made sense for you of some of the challenges that are happening. So let me just thank my virtual panelists, Kelly, Emad, and Nancy. And thank you, André, for coming into the studio. Thank you all.
Really valuable perspectives on how to lead both through times of crisis and leaders to be bearers of hope, but also some of the key competencies for the future, and the importance of values, culture, and a strong sense of purpose. A big thank you, Andrew, and all panelists for an excellent discussion. And both topic, as discussed, on how to act through crisis, how to lead through crisis, and the future skills.